Hi everyone, it's me again. I'm back this week with another unscripted video because it seems like you guys really enjoy it. So who am I to deny you what you enjoy? This week I want to nerd out over Dark Souls 3 because I feel like I haven't done Dark Souls 3 justice on this channel. So I don't really have much else to say in the intro other than thank you to my glorious members. I appreciate all of you, and if you'd like to join my membership, you can do so in the description. But other than that, let's get straight into it. So this right here is my first favorite piece of architecture. It is obviously a Knight of Astora sitting in front of what I think to be a Lord Vessel. Just because the texture is the same as the Lord Vessel, but I don't think it is. It might just be an inconspicuous bowl, but as far as I'm aware, the model itself is a Lord Vessel. Like, that is the Lord Vessel. Yeah, this was like the very first thing when I played this game for the first time. I was like, holy moly! I love Dark Souls 1. This was a really nice on-the-nose moment. But yeah, this is a Knight of Astora. You pick up your Estus flask from his lap here. Some people think this is Oscar. This is absolutely not Oscar. Unfortunately, Oscar is very much long and dead prior to this night. Kind of your first nod to the fact that Lothric is incredibly closely tied to Lordran, and you'll see a lot of like Dark Souls 1 in Dark Souls 3. Pretty self-explanatory really as to why this is my favorite. It's a Knight of Astora. You get the Estus flask from this guy, and the positioning of this knight is absolutely in Oscar's favor, you know? There's a couple of Lord Vessels scattered throughout Dark Souls 3. I'm not sure if they're there as texture assets or reused assets, but there is a handful of Lord Vessels in Lothric. So this is my second favorite piece of architecture, which is actually right in front of our Astoran Knight here. It's this random bell that's like basked in sunlight. It's like the only thing in this area that is so obviously basked in sunlight. I don't know why, but I've always loved this bell. Because to me, I read it as like a nod to Quelaag and the Bell Gargoyles, but also like it's so weirdly out of place when you look at this area. So this is the top-down view of this beginning area, and the bell just doesn't really seem to make much sense here. I'm not quite sure what it would have been. Not to mention, this bell it's very small, and there's no real way to ring it either. If a bell is this high up, you could only assume there would be maybe like a piece of rope or a lever even that would be at the bottom that you could pull on or use, that it would ring the bell at the top. But this bell has just always been a very curious artifact to me. I don't think there's any kind of in-game significance. I'm not sure, because from the player POV here, if we just pretend that we are sort of running down, you wouldn't actually see it. You know, you pick up the Estus flask here and you sort of would just run like this. No, there's no, you know, a very minute number of players would probably run like this and notice the bell. But do you see what I mean when it's kind of the only thing in this area that is obviously basked in sunlight? Nothing else on the ground, or not even the trees on either side, are as purposely put in the sunlight as this. It's obviously something of complete unimportance. It's probably not relevant in any aspect, but I just find it so curious, and that's why I love it so much. Because what is it? Why is it here? What was its purpose? Especially when it's like not very well built, like, and its size also is not very impressive. It definitely wouldn't be as loud as the two bells from Lordran, for example. Maybe it's just there just because, but I like to think that it's there as a little nod to the ringing of the bells. So the next one is very on the nose and very obvious. It's the Four Thrones. My god, I love these thrones. Each one is so well designed, and it really encapsulates each lord very well. Here's my beloved Abyss Watchers. Absolutely fucking love these guys. Who else loves the Abyss Watchers? Am I right? I absolutely love these guys. But Honestly, one of my favorite things about this throne in particular is the wolf, or maybe not wolf, but it's the furry blanket cloth type material in sort of reference to Sif. Always, always, always loved this fur material over the throne. Absolutely adore it. And obviously all of the swords on the side, all of the homages to Artorias, my beloved. But yeah, it's, you know, you guys already know this. Everybody already knows this. I love the Abyss Watchers. I love anything that involves Artorias, but really and truly, this throne is just, oh, it's so perfectly done. It's absolutely perfectly done. I do like the design of this throne because it's so the other three thrones kind of slightly bear, four thrones, sorry, bear resemblance. But Yorm's is like, it's out of place, and I think that explains Yorm well. He was out of place. I'm terrible. I'm absolutely terrible at wording it, but Yorm is a poor, unfortunate soul. And I think the fact that the chair is so obviously different looking, I think explains that well. And it also explains the fact that he is of the profaned capital and not so much Lothric. I think it's a good nod to that as well, because obviously the profaned capital would have different architecture from Lothric. That is something that we can know and conceive to be true. So I really, really like, I mean, I like all of the thrones, but Yorm's is great. I mean, I said it already. These thrones are so well done. We have Aldridge's throne. You can definitely tell it's damp. But what I do like is that you can't really tell if it's damp with water or blood. I think the choice to use red fabric is intentional here, because if you've ever spilt any water on a red fabric, you can't tell that it's water because it just goes this dark red color. Personally, never seen blood on red fabric, but I can only assume blood on red fabric would kind of do the same thing. So I like that this throne both gives Aldridge's aquatic alliances a nod, as well as his cannibalistic alliances. It's this mysterious liquid on the throne, and I like that the throne itself has to sort of be covered over because he just oozes gunk. When I think of Aldrich, I just kind of think gunk. I'm like, this is a gunky guy. He's covered in a lot of gunk, and obviously his skull is very maggot infested. Lothric's throne is interesting to me. It's the only throne that isn't adorned with something. So Yorm has this cloth, the Abyss Watchers have the fur, Ludleth has this drape, and then obviously Aldrich has this cover to prevent all the gunk from the chair. But Lothric's is bare. It's funny because the chair is bland and there's no adornments on it whatsoever, but also the flame itself is speaking through the throne. The throne has been embered. It's the kiln is here present within it, not literally, of course, figuratively, but I think in a funny way the lack of adornment tells the player both the fact that Lothric did indeed not care to link the flame, because he did not care even to adorn his own throne with something to make it more comfortable. You know, at the end of the day, this throne is made of hard rock stone, and by the looks of it, it's probably fairly hot to sit on. So you think, you know, you'd maybe put like a blanket on there, a pillow or something to sit on, but you know, Lothric didn't even bother to do that. But also the fact that it's plain without adornment tells you that's all it needs to be. This is the throne of nobility. This is the very throne that encapsulates those who are destined to follow in Gwyn's footsteps, and so it does not need to be adorned. So I think it's a very, very cool double take, depending on how you want to perceive it. And funnily enough, I think that's how you can perceive Lothric as well. You know, I think Lothric is very complicated, more complicated than the game lets on, really. I think all 5 of the thrones do a great job at explaining the characters fairly well, and I really, really, really do like these thrones very, very much. Also, fun fact, the bonfire in Firelink Shrine is actually a Lord vessel. This is what I meant, that there is a handful of Lord vessels in Dark Souls 3, and the second one is here, right underneath the bonfire. I mean, you can tell, really, that it is a Lord vessel, because the bonfire itself sits in a Lord vessel, but you get a better look when you go underneath the map and see it right here. Funnily enough, I think if you wanted to make a lore connection, you put the coiled sword in this bowl, right? And then you can warp freely from the very beginning of the game. And I think lore-wise, I guess it's because you put the coiled sword in the Lord vessel that you're able to do so. But I do know a couple of people on Reddit have stated maybe when they programmed the original Lord vessel, they kind of attached all of the means to warp within it. I'm not sure how to word it properly, but basically they kind of programmed the ability to warp and they attached that program to the Lord vessel. And some people on Reddit have claimed that's why they use the Lord vessel in Dark Souls 3 as an asset, because it has all the programming it needs attached to it to allow warping. So here's the third Lord vessel you find in Dark Souls 3. It's right in this room as you use the bonfire for the first time that takes you to the High Wall of Lothric. If you turn around, the Lord vessel sits right here with a coiled sword of its own. Once again, I am proving that the Lord vessel is very bountiful in Dark Souls 3. So the next area I really, really like is Farron Keep. Now, I don't enjoy playing through Farron Keep as an area, but I really, 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 funnily enough, love the design of it. I think it does such a good job of really defiling the Royal Wood and Darkroot Garden and even Sen's Fortress. I think this area is so impressionable once you make the connection that you're standing in what once was easily one of the most pretty areas in Lordran, you know? And I think that's why the Farron Keep or Farron Woods, whatever you call it, Road of Sacrifices even, I think that's why this area is so impressionable on me, because these small telltale signs that you're standing in the part of Lordran that was at one point fairly peaceful, and now all of a sudden you see it in this defiled, hideous, ugly, grotesque space where everything and everyone in it, I guess, is also defiled alongside it. I mean, in my opinion, gameplay-wise, this area isn't great. I think it's a bit arduous as an area. But design-wise, architecture-wise, this area is absolutely brilliant. Farron Keep is an absolutely brilliant area design-wise because it's such a stark contrast to what the area previously was. The fact that you have to explore this poison swamp so vastly to properly put the pieces together and discover that you are in the Royal Wood, that you are in Darkroot Garden, I think that makes the reveal all the more sad and all the more impressionable once again because of how disgusting this area is and how all of the enemies in this area are so crazily violent. You know, the gardeners, the imps, the mushrooms, all from Dark Souls 1, they're nowhere near as violent and hostile as these Gru enemies in Dark Souls 3. I mean, the enemies in this area are just like, wow, you have to calm yourself down, you know? So while I don't enjoy the area from a gameplay perspective, I really, really do sit back and appreciate it on its design level and its storytelling level too. The player has to actively seek out the storytelling within this area. At its base level, it just looks like some classic Miyazaki poison swamp action, because there's just nothing for miles, just poison swamp. But you know, if you stumble a bit too far, you end up finding some rather depressing scenery, you know, like the mushroom parents, the mushroom children, the horrifying imagery of the serpent men effectively crucified. This area really is truly gruesome, and while mechanically it might not play great as an area because poison swamps are poison swamps at the end of the day, It's honestly such an incredible area from storytelling and design perspective, and the very, very small details that give it away as to where exactly you're standing at this current point in time. Like, you're very literally in the heart of Ulasil, but at the same time, the area is so big that you're also in Sen's fortress, and we know this not only from the crucified serpent men, but the blades, the blades that have been taken out of Sen's, and obviously Sen's itself has been demolished, and now the very same serpent men that sought to kill you are now decorations of the area. Like, I just don't think that you can properly explain just how well this area is done from a design perspective and from a storytelling perspective. I just don't think you can properly understand the sheer level of how depressing this section of the game is, especially when you remember that at its core, Royal Wood is a peaceful place, and the inhabitants there are peaceful and they live in peace, and it was only the abyss that kind of turned them into what they became. My favorite part of this area is that the door that you need to open to access the Abyss Watchers fight it's the door that you need to open in Dark Souls 1 to access Sif's fight. But you can also kind of tell, and it also is kind of obvious, by the fact that some force of nature or someone has etched away at the door. Because obviously you need to buy, from Andre, you need to buy the key to open the door. In Lothric, no such key exists, so someone would have come across this locked door in this now properly refined building, or archway should I say, and instead of seeking out a key, instead of seeking out a proper means to open it, they've instead forcefully removed the lock by etching it out of the door, and in its place they've locked it by the force of fire. But yet, really and truly, while I don't enjoy playing through Farron Keep, I absolutely enjoy the storytelling that takes place in Farron Keep. I truly am under the impression there is no such place in Dark Souls 3 that conveys storytelling as well as Farron Keep does. So now we're at the depths of the world, very, very far underground, and most obviously, of course, we are in the catacombs of Carthus that then leads into the Smoldering Lake, or better known as Demon Ruins, I do like this area. It's very much a maze, and I'm terrible at navigating this section of the game, but I do, and always have, loved the design of it. Mostly because I think it makes you kind of feel sad for what became of Lost Izalith, and it properly conveys to the player that the world of demons and the world of the chaos is really gone. Like, nobody sought to continue that world except for the handful of pyromancers that even then, only then really cared for pyromancy. They never really cared for its kind of the legacy behind pyromancy, I suppose. I'm not sure if I worded that correctly, but I don't know. I always get very somber when I come into the ruins. As an area to play through, it can be a bit stressful. There's enemies everywhere and they're pretty tough, but when everything's dead and you have time to navigate, there's a very, very somber, almost sad atmosphere of this area, because I've always been very intrigued by chaos within Dark Souls franchise, and also by demons, because we know that they are incredibly intelligent creatures. I mean, for instance, our good friend Capra Demon here could tame animals and used those same animals against the chosen undead in Dark Souls 1, when you go to Lower Undead Burg and you walked into that godforsaken tiny little area, and Capra Demon has tamed his own pet dogs, so the demons are incredibly intelligent, and I think that's why this area makes me feel so somber, very, very sad. The whole Lost Izalith thing, the witches, I mean, Wailana, the Fair Lady, it's all incredibly sad, Overall, I just think it's such a shame that the chaos died and kind of went unknown. It kind of died, I guess, because people... I mean, it's so far underground anyway, the chaos. I think I get so somber when I think about it because the Witch of Chaos truly did really care for the chaos, and she really did care for Lost Izalith and all of her daughters, and she really did try her best to let Lost Izalith and the demons within it live in peace without this outer power, without Gwyn getting his slimy hands all over it, you know. And I think in a way that brought about harm instead of good. And I think it's because she cared so much that Lost Izalith remained its own thing that it unfortunately ended up dying with no one to continue that legacy, and nobody who really cared for that legacy, but only because they never knew it existed to begin with. But yeah, I think that's why I get so mellow when I come through this area. I think it's because I know that the demons and Lost Izalith were so intelligent, and because I mean, when you really look at the bigger picture, the demons weren't actively hurting anyone. The chosen undead kind of goes there of their own fruition and just kind of says, I'm gonna just kill everyone, actually, because I feel like it. Like, the demons really did live amongst themselves. Yeah, I really, really enjoy and kind of love this area. One, for all of the reasons I stated, and two, I think it's because I'm glad that Miyazaki got another chance to paint the demon ruins and Lost Izalith in a light that befits their nature more closely, you know? But yeah, you might think I'm joking, but genuinely and truly, I do get quite sad when I come through this area, because I mean, it's always sad when a species of such high intelligence comes to ruin and nobody ever really knows, you know? The demons of Lost Izalith lived and died at the bottom of Lordran and the bottom of Lothric with no one really caring, you know? Onto Irithyll of the Boreal Valley now. There's just something about Irithyll as a whole that I've just always absolutely adored. I think it's the deceptively calm nature of it before you pass through the gate. It's just such a beautiful looking area. The eternal night here is very, very well done, and it's also like incredibly mysterious. Before you know anything about the area itself, it's a very mysterious and curious area, and a lot of people, what's funny is that obviously you need the doll to enter, and a lot of people were like, why the hell do I need a doll to enter Irithyll? And it's not only until you make the connection that Priscilla is Gwendolyn's mother that you understand why you need the doll to enter Irithyll, the city that Gwendolyn founded, you know. And I guess he's paying homage in remembrance of his mother, who, from what we can only understand, he probably didn't really have a relationship with in his younger years, because Priscilla was within the painting. But maybe he did, we never know. I'm not sure of the significance of how pointed everything is in Irithyll. I mean, it's actually the same in Lothric as well. All of the buildings are incredibly pointed. There's all this pointiness going on. So if anybody does know the significance of that, please let me know, because I'm sure there's absolutely a reason as to why everything is so incredibly pointy, both in Lothric and in Irithyll. So if you do know, let me know. When it clicked in my head that Gwendolyn is the one who founded Irithyll, a part of my heart melted for him, because it was kind of like that sign of, oh, he like actually accepted that feminine side of himself, and he did accept his allegiances to the moon, and the fact that he chose to shroud his city not in bountiful sunlight but instead in eternal darkness, I think funnily enough, it felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders, and my heart sort of leapt in happiness for Gwendolyn because, you know, in his younger years, he really did struggle with that side of himself. So, you know what I've always really liked about Irithyll is that Onolondo is like right there. And in fact, you can see it on the bridge. It's a Vorten dancer, my beloved. This is the next part of Irithyll I really enjoy. And I enjoy it so much because I don't really know what I'm looking at. I've never understood the significance of these random children statues that are on both sides of this walkway. Obviously, these are deacons, and the deacons are here because of Pontiff, and him getting his slimy hands all over Irithyll and absolutely turning it into a state. But these children, I'm not sure I've ever understood it. Maybe I'm missing something incredibly obvious, but I have racked my brains over these kids for a while, and I'm not sure I get it, because it's definitely not Gwendolyn because they have legs, and it's not Lothric either because they have working legs, you know? I've never been able to figure it out, but I mean, again, my Dark Souls 3 lore isn't actually super duper strong. Dark Souls 3, you know, we're halfway through the video, but Dark Souls 3 is my least played Souls game, so maybe I am missing something incredibly obvious, and if I am, please do tell me. Please do, because I just can't figure out, and I've never been able to figure out why there is so many statues of children and why they're all holding swords. But I understand the deacons, at least. The deacons are here because of Pontiff, you know? But the kids, absolutely no idea. Very quickly, I know this is a boss arena, and I've already done a video about boss arenas, but I do really like these giant statues of Gwendolyn. And you know what? I love these giant statues of Gwendolyn, referring back to the point I made earlier of I see it as a sign of acceptance, because Gwendolyn, in my personal subjective opinion, I really do think Gwendolyn had a very difficult time accepting who he was in his younger years. So again, linking back to the point of him kind of making Irithyll an acceptance of himself, and kind of founding Irithyll to say, you know what, I know who I am, you know, seeing these giant, very proudly displayed statues of himself made my heart happy, you know? So now we're in the profaned capital. And I've always liked the architecture of this area because it's so, funnily enough, it's so incredibly foreign. Even though it only, I guess, only a very keen eye would recognize the architecture to be closely linked to Drangleic. This kind of architecture is very Drangleic, but funnily enough, the design way of it does a really, really good job of making it feel and seem incredibly foreign. When the player comes down here, I mean, by this point in the game, you're probably playing through the game, trying to make connections when and where you see them. Because by this point in the game, you already know how closely linked to Dark Souls 1 this game is. But when you get to the Profane Capital, you might really feel like for the first time you are truly out of place. Like, the foreignness of this area is very, very well conveyed, and again, I think only the keenest of eyes would recognize the architecture to be of Drangleic allegiances. I mean, the Profane Capital as a whole, as far as I'm aware, there's very, very few information, is that the right wording? Or a lack of information about it. And I guess it's really kind of up to player interpretation. But as far as I'm aware, the Profane Capital descends from Alsana and the Abyss in one way. I think the Profane Flame is a mixture of the Old Chaos and the Abyss. I'm not entirely sure, to be really honest with you. I have heard a couple people speculate that this is Ilium Lois, or at least it was what is underneath Ilium Lois, but I don't know the percentage of how true that is. But yeah, I've always liked the Profane Capital because it is so distant from what this game up to this point has portrayed to you. Up to this point, the game has made 1,000,000,001 very obvious choices in a design way to tell you that Lothric is the product of the kingdoms before it, and you can tell. This is how you can tell. I'm showing you things that you can use to tell how closely aligned it is, but then you get to the profane capital and you're like, where am I right now? Like, what is going on? But no, I think it's a nice Dark Souls 2 homage, but at the same time, it's not so obvious that it's a Dark Souls 2 homage, and I think I've always liked the distant, foreign, out of place feeling it has. And funnily enough, I think it feels that way because of how different Dark Souls 2 was as a game, you know? If Lothric itself barely knows anything about the profane capital, why should the player feel comfortable here, you know? I'm not saying that you feel uncomfortable here because the area is very small, but I would say you're not quite sure of it, and I think you're precisely intended to feel that way, you know? I appreciate it more for the vibe that it brings and the fact that you are very much intended to be like, where the hell am I? Like, what the hell is this? Why am I here, you know? And I think it does that very, very well. And of course, at the end of it all sits Yorm on his equally as out-of-place throne. We are up in Archdragon Peak now, and this is obviously where you fight the Ancient Wyvern, but I love I'm sure you can tell what I'm about to point out. These obvious, very impressive statues of the Nameless King, and the fact that they're right at the start of the level, it's such a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant touch to the discovery that Nameless King is the one who sort of became the leader of the dragons, I suppose. Again, like I always say, I think only the keenest of eyes would be able to point out this sort of Gwyn-esque attire. I mean, the Gwyn-esque stance that he carries also, but yeah, I've always, again, it was only something I could appreciate on my second playthrough, because I don't think you realize how many things you might miss on your first playthrough, like design-wise, like how many things might go over your head, because obviously at that point you might not know. Like I can confidently say on my first playthrough, I ran through here, not even taking a mental note of the statues at all. Like I don't even think I realized that they were stood here on my first playthrough, to be honest. But yeah, always really liked the touch of the beginning of the area, leaning towards the actual boss of the area, not only through the statues of Farum, but also by this big old bell, because obviously you have to ring the bell to summon the Nameless King, you know? So now we have taken a massive, massive jump. We are now in the Ringed City. Here it is in all its glory. The Ring City, and all the way over in this unimportant corner is a birch tree, a white birch tree. In front of it, I think there's 3 young white branches, but the reason I love this so much, it implies that dusk made it here, even to the very end of the world, even to the end of time itself. Dusk made it here, and she planted this tree. I was like, there's no way Dusk is even present at the very end of time itself, at the very last inkling of the flame. Dusk is still present. And I also like the touch of the birch tree being in this area of the swamp where the abyss is kind of most congregated. There's lots and lots of abyss here. I think that's another nice touch, is that Dusk purposely planted the birch tree in the corner of the swamp where the abyss is kind of most present. But yeah, I really like the design choice of this tree, because to me, Dusk is such an incredibly curious character. She's everywhere and nowhere. She has been to every universe and and has seen every single turnout of the flame. She was in Lordran, she was in Ulasil, she was in Drang Lake, and now she's here in not only, I mean, obviously she's gone to Lothric. There's birch trees everywhere, all over Lothric, but the fact that she even made it as far to the end of time itself, she made it inside Filianor's little bubble where only pygmies live, and she planted this birch tree because it really helps back up the fact that dusk is everywhere. And I mean, I could go on about Dusk for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. She's such an incredibly curious character. But I just love that the birch tree is here at this really far away corner of the swamp, and you'd really have to go out of your way to find it, you know? I just love the design choice of putting it here, because the Ring City, obviously, it's technically not real. It exists only in Filianor's little bubble. And obviously when you break that illusion, you find out that Gale has slaughtered and killed every single thing. And it's basically just a giant heap of dust. But to find a birch tree inside this bubble, it's so peculiar. I mean, obviously, the Abyss being here is also very, very interesting. The fact that the Abyss even wormed its way into the end of all things truly goes to show how powerful it is. But I think the birch tree is even more curious than the Abyss, you know? I highly encourage you to properly look into Dusk if you haven't already. She's very morally grey, in my opinion. I don't think Dusk is either good or bad as a character. I think Dusk only lives for herself, sort of thing. Basically, major nerd moment is all. That's why I like this birch tree so much. So this is all the way at the very end of the DLC. This is the Church of Filianor. The one that Filianor is actually in, not this Filianor church that we can't access. But the reason I like it so much is the doors here that you open, the two figures on either door is Gwendolyn. And I've always been kind of mind blown at that fact. I don't know why, but it always has been very impressionable that the doors to Filianor are Gwendolyn and not any of her other siblings. You know, you might think that it would be Gwyn. You might think that it might make more sense for it to be Farum, for instance, to be on the doors that guard Filianor. But it's Gwendolyn. And I've always found that very, very interesting indeed, because I think it sort of paints Gwendolyn of a much higher stature and power than the player might have originally thought. And I think if I go all the way back to my point that I said in Irithyll of Gwendolyn in his later years definitely grew to accept himself, I think that Gwendolyn became an extremely powerful figure for people. So I've always loved that it's Gwendolyn on these doors and not somebody else. I just find it, I don't really know how to properly word it, but I just find it so satisfying that it's Gwendolyn and not any other of Filianor's siblings. And it's not even Filianor herself, you know, you think that the statues on the doors that lead to Filianor might be Filianor, but instead it's Gwendolyn. Because we saw this same kind of thing all the way back in Dark Souls 1. There's statues of Gwendolyn in Ulasil, and I think it really does a good job of alluding to just how powerful Gwendolyn was, because the game itself paints Gwendolyn as a fairly weak and kind of frail being, which he is. Gwendolyn was incredibly weak, and he was fairly frail, and he wasn't as powerful as his other siblings. But it's evidently clear through the things that the game doesn't tell you that Gwendolyn was much larger than what the people around him wanted him to be, both in Ulasil and here in the Ringed City, at the end of all things, at the end of very time itself, at the end of the flame. The thing that people make statues of is Gwendolyn, and it's not Gwyn, and it's not the Nameless King, you know, it's Gwendolyn of all people. And before anybody says anything, I know that there's literally a statue of Gwyn right here. But what I mean is, at the very end of the DLC, and at the very end of all things, the doors that you open are adorned with Gwendolyn and nobody else. And I'm not sure if I worded that right. I'm not sure if I got my point across correctly, but I just think it's very satisfying that it's Gwendolyn once again. Because as frail as Gwendolyn is and was, he was a very powerful being at the end of the day. And I think he brought hope to a lot of people. And I think he brought that hope because he knew what it was like to maybe feel hopeless. It's also true to the fact that kind of with every major point in Dark Souls, it seems to be Gwendolyn at the forefront. So when we get to Honor Londo, it's Gwendolyn who's in charge. And when we get to Irithyll, it's Gwendolyn who founded the city. And so is it really that much of a surprise that the last door you open is quote unquote guarded by Gwendolyn once again, you know? I think that's food for thought. It appears that Gwendolyn really and truly was the only person in his own bloodline who so deeply and passionately cared for it. Not that Gwyn didn't, I'm not implying that at all, but I think Gwendolyn looked at his bloodline very differently from the way that his father did, and very differently from the way his siblings did, because Nameless King, you know, didn't care for his legacy and instead aligned himself with dragons, and Guinevere also kind of didn't care. She ended up traveling all over the place and had children of her own, but what's funny is that she didn't have children of her own and then have them be raised with the traditions of Gwyn. She raised them kind of with her own traditions and made her own story for it. Filianor, of course, ends up becoming nothing more than a puppet who sits in this hopeless little room, keeping the pygmies in this bubble that they're not even aware that they're in. And Yorshka, poor Yorshka, like, she doesn't know what the fuck is going on. She's not educated in any sense of the word, you know? So it's really funny how at the end of it all, at the end of all things, it's Gwendolyn who is the one that stands so proud and stands on the height of all things, when the game tries to convey Gwendolyn as weak. But what's also funny is that those things are not untrue. Like, Gwendolyn was weak. He was the weakest in his family, but he wasn't unimpressive. And it's clear that he meant a lot to a lot of people. And I think you can only kind of discover that through looking into things like this, like architecture and world design, or whatever you want to call it, because otherwise you probably would go down to remember Gwendolyn as nothing more than a sad image of what his father wanted to be. But it turns out he wasn't that. Like, he clearly had it in him to found a city, and he clearly had it in him to, I suppose, create a religion of his own. And the fact that even at the end of time itself, he's still protecting his siblings, and he's still trying to hold his father's name in this very much long lost sunlight that it once sat in, I think is a very, very, very cool thing that might go over your head. Okay, so that was everything I kind of wanted to share and everything I wanted to nerd out over. Please let me know in the comments what your favorite architecture, design, storytelling through design sort of thing is. And also let me know if I'm wrong about anything, because again, my Dark Souls 3 lore is fairly rusty. I still learn stuff about Dark Souls 3 to this day. But yeah, this was a very cool video for me to film because, well, rambling is what I do best. But yeah, let me know if you enjoyed. Let me know what I'm wrong about, because I know I'm definitely wrong about something. I think some people think that I don't like Dark Souls 3, but this is not true. It's just my least played. And I absolutely adore Dark Souls 3's design and storytelling through design. And there's no doubting that it is probably the best of the three souls when it comes to telling stories through design. But other than that, I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you all are staying safe. And aside from that, praise the sun.
Don't you dare let yourself go hollow, lest my time spent on you be wasted.